Hi, welcome back to Educator.com's AP Music Theory course. Today's lesson is on non-harmonic tones. So the objectives for this lesson, we're going to learn how to write and recognize non-harmonic tones. So we're going to look at different ones such as passing tones and then neighboring tones, and then we're going to see suspensions, appoggiaturas, and then finally the pedal point. So let's take a look at passing tones, and we can look at these non-harmonic tones in the context of our four-voice part writing. So I'm just going to write a couple of chords in a row so we can then introduce some passing tones, or tones that are passing between different notes of a chord but that are not part of that chord. So let's look at, if we're in C major, let's start with a one chord here, E, G, C. And so let's go from this to, what about a four chord? So we'll write a four chord here. So we've got an F in the bass, and then we've got, wait, that's not going to work, is it? Let's see. C, F, A. Okay, so actually, I'm going to have to write a third chord after this. What about a two chord? So let's see. Oh. All right, so now we have this space of a third in between in the top voice from a C to an A, which means that if I wanted to, I could perhaps fill this in with a B, and maybe this would be a half note here, and this would stay a whole note. And so the idea of a passing tone is that it fills in the space between often a third or maybe even a fourth. There could be two passing tones perhaps. And we can distinguish between passing tones that are accented and unaccented. So this would be an unaccented passing tone because this is happening, let's say, if the measures were here on every whole note. So this would be happening not on an accent. So let's put that, let's say, here's an unaccented passing tone. So again, a passing tone, and you can circle the non-harmonic tones, are often moved by step and fill in the interval of a third. Let's do one more example since this one got a little strange. What about, let's be in C major, let's start on a one chord again. Let's see. C, E, G. And let's move this to a, let's see, what about a 5-6? So we can practice with a first inversion chord. So first I know that B is going to be in the bass, and then G here, and then I want to double this G. So I'll write it down here, and now I have this voice here, the C moving to a G, is not by step, whereas all the other voices are moving by step, so that this gives me the opportunity to add in passing tones. So I can make this half note and two quarter notes, one on B, one on A, moving to G. So again, these are unaccented passing tones. Okay, now we can look at neighboring tones. So those, I can go right back to that chord progression that I started with, 1 to 4. And looking at the top voice, so it's staying on C, but if it was going to be ornamented by a neighboring tone, I could add a D and then going back down to the C by step. So a neighboring tone is one that leaves a note and comes back to the same note, either above or below. So this would be an upper neighbor. And similarly, could do the exact same thing and instead use a lower neighbor. So this would be a lower neighbor. And again, it's always good to circle the non-harmonic tones just so it's clear in the context of the harmonic analysis what is to be counted as part of the harmony and what is simply a decoration. Okay, now suspensions are a little bit different in that they involve more than just a note ornamenting harmony. So let's look at a suspension in C major, and we'll start on a 1 chord here. So C, let's see, E, G, C. So suspension has 3 parts. The first part is the preparation. So I'm going to use this C up here to form the suspension. So this C is being prepared, preparation. And when I say it's being prepared, it means that it appears first in a consonant context, and then it's going to be tied over. And I'm going to change chords now to a 5. So G, D, G. And so now instead of the expected B that would be part of this dominant chord, I'm holding this C over and then resolving it down to a B and dividing this whole note in half. So what's happening is the preparation where the C is consonant, and here is the suspension where the C is dissonant, and then this B here that finally comes is the resolution, where the voice again becomes consonant with the harmony. And now there's different kinds of suspensions, and what's different about them is the interval that the suspended note makes with the bass. So in this case, the C against the G is a 4th, and it resolves down to a 3rd, so this is called a 4-3 suspension. And you can notate it in the figures this way. And let's look at another kind of suspension. What about, let's see. Let's start with the same 1 chord and move to a 4 chord. Let's see. And let's put the E on top this time. Or actually, let's put the G on top just to make it easier. So C, E, G. And now we want to tie this G over. So this, and I'm not going to do the rest of the voices, but just to make it even more clear. So here's the preparation, and here's the suspension, and here is the resolution. And this is, of course, a G against an F, so it's a 9th going to the octave to an 8, so 9/8 suspension. And the last kind of suspension that we didn't talk about involving the upper voices is a 7/6 suspension. So what if we had, let's say, a C and let's see, C, E, G, E, and then moving to a, let's see, what about a B? Well, let's just do it intervallically. So we're going to move this E, C to an 2/6. So an F here. So what happens is the E now is the preparation. And it's being suspended over an F, so it's a 7. And then it goes down to a D, which makes the 6th. So again, here is the suspension. And the D is, of course, the resolution. So just to recap about suspensions here. They have 3 parts. First is the consonant preparation. Second is the suspension. And third is the resolution. And the 3 suspensions that we tried out here are the 4/3, the 9/8, and finally the 7/6. Okay, appoggiaturas is the next non-harmonic tone that we're going to discuss. So those occur in contrast to what we saw with the suspension. The appoggiatura would be something that happens without any kind of preparation. So G, C, E, and if I was going to go to another chord, like maybe a, let's see, what about an A minor chord? So let's draw an A here, and then keep the, let's see, keep the common tones, so C and E. And then the G moves to an A. So if, for instance, I was going to introduce a non-harmonic tone above this A, so what I could do is write a B here, moving down to an A. And so this, coming from this G, is jumping up to a B and then down to an A, so it's defined as an appoggiatura because it's unprepared and not by step. So it's, of course, this B is not a passing tone because the G up to a B is not a step and it's not a neighboring tone for the same reason. So this would be an example of an appoggiatura. And finally, we can discuss the pedal point, which is, again, different from all the non-harmonic tones we've seen, in that it involves a series of notes. So if we start with a tonic harmony on C, and we're going to keep this bass note going throughout here. So let's see, C. And what will happen is that the harmony will change above the bass note while the bass note stays the same. So for instance, we can have a 4 here and maybe a 7 here, and then in the end it will come back to making a consonance with the bass. So we start with a consonant sonority here, and then we move to a 4 chord, which would be A, C, F, and then we move to a 7 chord, so that would be what, B, D, F, and then move this back to a 1 chord. So we can see that here and here are the dissonances, and then beginning and ending are the consonant places. So a pedal point is any time where we have one note that is maintained and begins as a consonance, and then in the middle moves to some dissonant movements, kind of as an embellishment to this bigger 1 chord here, which is really the main harmony for this whole section. Okay, for some practice problems, let's practice embellishing some chord progressions with non-harmonic tones. So let's say we have just a simple 1, 2, 6, 5, 1. Let's see. So now we can first always write out the skeleton of the progression, so we know where all the main tones are at first. It's always a good idea to know where all the arrival places are. And now we can say that we're asked by the problem to provide a suspension in this exercise. So if we need to provide a suspension, we just need to look for a place where one voice moves down by step. And so I see one right here where this G is moving down to an F. So what I could do is simply erase the F and write a G here, and of course have the value, and then tie it over, and then have it resolve down to an F here. So again, this was my preparation, and this was the suspension, and here was the resolution. And then of course we have to adjust the figured bass symbols. So now we've made a 9/8 suspension here, so can add a 9/8 here. Okay, for example number 2, let's look at another set of harmonies. So maybe a 1 to a 6 to a 4, and then 5 and 1. And so again, with these part writing exercises, you always want to keep the common tones held over, and then move the other voices to the closest possible note. And now let's say we're asked by the question to provide some passing tones and neighboring tones. So let's see. So a good place, remember, to add a neighboring tone is when we need 2 notes that are staying on the same pitch. So here's an E that stays in E. So I can add an upper neighbor here by changing this to a half note and adding an F. So here's a neighboring tone. And then let's see, for passing notes, we would need voices that move maybe by a third or more. And actually, I'm not seeing the opportunity to do that here. So, oh, here's one. Of course, the F going to a D. So we can go F, E, D. And here's some passing tones. And let's add some more neighboring tones. So what about this A staying on this A, so we can make a lower neighbor this time here. So here's a neighboring tone. And then what if we, well, okay, that's good for this exercise. And for our third example, let's provide some appoggiaturas. So let's just do a simple 1, 5, 1. So C, G, C, E. Then G, B, D. And then G, C. And then instead of the D moving to an E by step, just how we had before, I'm going to put an F moving down to an E. So here is the appoggiatura. And of course, the appoggiatura resolves down by step, but is unprepared in that it doesn't come from a consonant on the same note, which would make it a suspension. And it's not being approached by step like the neighboring tone or the passing tone. And for the last example, let's say we are given a passage that already has some non-harmonic tones in them, and we are asked to analyze them. So let's say we have this here. Let's see. So something like this, and then moving to 2/6. So that would be D, and then 5. G, D, and then 1. Okay, so they're pretty easy to spot the non-harmonic tones because they're where the whole notes are divided into half notes. But let's see which one is which. So it's important to maintain the same voice. So this E goes down to a D and then goes back up to the E, not down to the C, because we're in the top voice here. So this is, of course, a lower neighbor tone. And from the 6 to the 2/6, we have a couple things happening. First of all, this E is being suspended over and then down to a D. So we see that this is a suspension. So, and the interval that we see being suspended over the F is a 7th, which means that it's a 7/6 suspension. And another thing that's happening is this C moving down to an A is passing through a B. So of course, this is a passing tone. And then on the final chord, we have an F moving to an E, which is unprepared. So we know that this is an appoggiatura. And that's it. And let's label the parts of the suspension too. So here's the preparation, here's the suspension, and here's the resolution. All right, thanks again for visiting educator.com's AP Music Theory course. See you next time.